Southland Tales is a 2006 film written and directed by Richard Kelly, his second film after Donnie Darko. It's a sci-fi black comedy musical. It's a bizarre film in almost every aspect. From the casting to the script to the music, it's incredibly discordant. Watching it for the first time is often an unpleasant experience, involving a mixture of disbelief, boredom, disgust, and confusion. It also might be one of my favorite films of all time, although it might also not be. For a long time, every film I watched was sorted into a star category, 1 to 5. The best of the best, like Die Hard, Whiplash, or Brazil, were at the top. After watching Southland Tales, it was given its own designation, a huge question mark. I simply had no way to categorize it. It wasn't so bad that it was good, but it also didn't seem to actually be good. One thing was certain, it wasn't mediocre. It simply defied categorization. Since then, it's always been at the back of my mind, and I wanted to investigate the film. Try to figure out where exactly it belonged, good or bad. To that end, last year I took to watching it near daily, a total of around 30 times. I watched the original version and the Cannes cut. I looked up articles, interviews, and trivia. Throughout all of this, the film stood resolute, an unsolvable enigma, good or bad. Of course, at this point, you're probably wondering what this ineffable film is about. The plot of Southland Tales is complicated, perhaps overly so. It begins with Boxer Santeros, a movie star played by The Rock, who is the husband of a senator's daughter. He's been missing for about a week, and it's revealed that he's gone through a time rift, traveling 69 minutes back through time. Since that event, he's been hooking up with Kristen Now, a psychic ex-porn star. Together, they've written a script that foretells the apocalypse. At the same time, Roland Tabernacle has been recruited by neo-Marxists to steal the identity of his twin brother, who is a cop. He is supposed to meet up with Boxer, and then fake being racist and commit a hate crime, but then use the footage as blackmail. At the same time, the Baron, the villain of the film, maybe, is busy working on a plan to throw the world into chaos. His company has invented a new type of energy that can travel wirelessly, and is theoretically unlimited. However, the production of it has disrupted the ocean's currents and created the time rift. After a cavalcade of events not dissimilar from a Rube Goldberg machine, most of the characters end up on a mega zeppelin, where there are a number of revelations. One of the most important is that Roland Tabernacle's brother is actually a copy of him who has traveled through the time rift. When they touch, it causes the end of the world. Through the actions of many of the characters in the film, this happens, and everyone dies just before the apocalypse happens. The film is a satire of Bush-era politics, American patriotism, the Book of Revelations, and the nature of media at the time. It is also parts 4 to 6 of a 6-part series, the other 3 released as a prequel comic series. It's certainly a very special film, and it's no wonder it has developed a cult following. To truly understand it, however, we have to do a deep dive, so without any further ado, Part 1, Seven Nation Army. The script for Southland Tales was originally quite different from the final results. It began live shortly after Donnie Darko premiered at Sundance in late January of 2001. Unfortunately for Kelly, the initial reception was quite chill, and no distributors picked up the film. He became depressed, believing his career was over before it had even begun. In order to cheer up, he started working on the scripts for a pair of comedy films. While Kelly has only brought 3 films to completion in his 20-year career, he has written dozens of scripts. His first script was called Bessie, about a mutant cow. The second would eventually become Southland Tales. The first iteration was an LA crime caper set in the present day. It had a lot more in common with The Big Lebowski, although, as I'll discuss later, this never really went away. It was about a group of struggling actors who wanted to extort a movie star by faking a shooting while he's on a police ride-along. It ended up with a blimp exploding over LA as well. Kelly said, "That's my career, and the Hindenburg is Donnie Darko, and the distribution and apparatus of Hollywood just shot my movie down with a rocket launcher." Of course, Donnie Darko would eventually be picked up for distribution, and the script was put to the side while Kelly worked on other projects, including Knowing, which would eventually be produced starring Nicolas Cage. There were certainly seeds for Southland Tales in that film, however, which is about a mysterious paper foretelling the apocalypse through cryptic messages. After moving on from that, Kelly came back to Southland Tales and rewrote it substantially, inspired both by the events of 9/11 and the Bush administration's response to it. He also made it more ambitious, translating it to be dystopian, with more religious themes. That ambition had a cost, however, as while making the film, Kelly believed that it might never actually get produced, especially with the amount of visual effects he would need for his vision. With this in mind, he started working on the prequel graphic novels as a sort of contingency plan. Even if the script went nowhere, he wanted to have something that was actually produced. This was largely to the detriment of the film, however, as key portions of the story were exclusive to the comics. Many of the ideas were drawn directly from current events, the most significant of those being the signing of the Patriot Act. For those unaware, it was a national law made in response to the events of September 11th, moving at an accelerated pace through Congress, being signed on October 26th. It expanded law enforcement surveillance capabilities, including wiretapping, increased the penalties for terrorism charges, and most controversially allowed for indefinite detention without trial for immigrants. While some of the individual elements were changed, large parts of the act survived until 2020, when Congress opted not to extend it. It was one of the most defining legislative efforts of the decade. Its impact can be seen in the fictional organization US Ident, whose role in Southland Tales is to keep track on everything. This includes cameras inside of bathrooms, which played into the fears that the US government had eyes literally everywhere. To illustrate, we should consider the quote,
"You're a pimp. Pimps don't commit suicide."
The line is said a number of times throughout the film, by a few different characters including the narrator. It's considered to be of utmost importance. Kelly talks about how it's related to not only veteran suicide rates, which was and still is a substantial issue, but also something much wider in scale. He said that America itself was a pimp nation, and that it was self-destructing by invading Iraq, or in other words, committing suicide. The idea was that the line is sort of a protest mantra. The United States has committed suicide with its war on terror, but that was contrary to what should have been the country's foundations. After 9/11, the pimp nation destroyed itself, and what was left is the world of the Southland Tales. Part 2. The best days are yet to come. The inspirations for the film are as disparate as they are numerous. Kelly specifically cites a few films: Kiss Me Deadly, Pulp Fiction, Brazil, and Dr. Strangelove. Kiss Me Deadly is shown early on in Krista's apartment, when the characters are discussing their screenplay about the end of the world. The film itself is a classic noir that follows a private investigator who becomes embroiled in a mystery after picking up a female hitchhiker. While the exact details are different, there are direct parallels to the events of Southland Tales. There's significant sci-fi elements in Deadly, a huge departure from other films at the time. It also uses its LA setting as a key element of the plot, and involves complicated character motivations, and many references to the apocalypse and the Manhattan Project. It is also the direct inspiration for the glowing suitcase in Pulp Fiction, and as an evolution of the French New Wave, it helped to define the genre, which would influence later titles like Chinatown and The Big Lebowski. Pulp Fiction's influence is obvious. The reaction to violence is similar in both films. There are elements of divine intervention and a series of interconnected storylines. Brazil offers the ethereal quality of the film, the narrow ending, and various satirical elements about the nature of bureaucracy. Strangelove has the same actor playing multiple characters, as well as the apocalypse. In addition to the films, his biggest literary influences were Philip K. Dick and T.S. Eliot. This comes across in the sci-fi elements of the film, and both are directly coded by different characters. Another interesting element is the musical nature of the film. While there is only a single proper musical number, the soundtrack is essential to it, and including the various musical montages, it would certainly be argued that the film fits in that genre. There are very few films that fit into this category, although it could be compared to Repo, the genetic opera, a film released a few years later to similarly cold reception. Southland Tales plays with genre in a number of interesting ways. Just like Donnie Darko, it doesn't fit into a single box. While it's a comedy, it's played completely straight, with no real explicit jokes, just humor in the context. While some great comedies, like those previously mentioned, are similar, Southland Tales is too busy explaining its own mythology, and delving not into the motivations of the characters, but what they are thinking and feeling at a given time to have time for actual humor. It's set in a near-future dystopian version of the US, with police officers fighting against the neo-Marxists, but it doesn't fit with the vision of dystopian films, not the modern young adult fare or the older fixtures of the genre. The characters, despite the presence of the government, are given completely free movement and are able to defy them numerous times. It could be given the title of drama, but that doesn't feel right either, given the satire that's dripping from every scene. However, it's also difficult to call it an ironic film, as based on interviews with Kelly, and the commentary about the film, it's completely sincere. Kelly has an answer for every possible question about the film, and while they may be unsatisfactory and strange, they were still all planned out. Just like my issues with giving it a rating, it's a film whose genre is simply a set of 3 question marks, with a few penciled in notes that half fit. It's possible it's the first and only Strand type film. Despite all the confusion about the genre, the studios were still excited about the project, as were many actors. Kelly was a cult star. With the success of Donnie Darko, everyone wanted to work with him. To that end, he was able to attract the incredible cast that makes up Southland Tales' principal actors: Sean William Scott, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Janine Garofalo, Amy Poehler, Kevin Smith. Almost all of them were in the peak of their careers, be it on Saturday Night Live, huge film roles, or TV. Kelly intentionally went after actors he felt were pigeonholed, and he wanted to show their range and acting abilities. Perhaps most surprisingly, he was able to secure Moby to do the soundtrack, the elusive musician who rarely collaborated on film projects, although in the 90s he did the soundtracks for Heat and Tomorrow Never Dies. He was a huge fan of Donnie Darko, however, so when Kelly reached out, he leaped at the opportunity. Kelly wanted a soundtrack that contrasted the angry and vulgar nature of the film, and the dissonance helped contribute with the overall tone. Thus, much of Moby's score is operatic and soothing, despite the violence occurring on screen. Some of the other actors required different methods to join. The Rock, who was certainly near the peak of his fame as a wrestler, was persuaded to join after being shown schematics of the Mega Zeppelin and given a general outline of the plot. Despite the variety of cast that Kelly was able to get, there are a few he regretted not casting. Will Sasso's part, who plays a slimy agent, was originally going to be Artie Lang from The Howard Stern Show, but there were scheduling issues. Kelly originally wanted Rick Moranis for John Larroquette's role, that of a government liaison, but Moranis had fully retired from acting, and they were unable to bring him back for one last performance. The last performance that Kelly regrets is that he wanted to get Oliver Stone to play the ice cream truck driver / weapons dealer, but that deal fell through. The shoot itself was short, but generally regarded as a pleasant experience for the actors involved. For Donnie Darko, Kelly's previous film, they had around 3 weeks to shoot the entire thing. For Southland Tales, it was closer to 29 days. However, as this film was much grander in scale, including many more characters, stunts, and locations, there were challenges. For most of the shots of the film, they only had one take to get things right. This was especially true for the stunts, like ripping the ATM out of the building, or the ice cream truck being knocked over. With the budget and time, there simply wasn't an option to get it wrong. Luckily, they had a good team, and never had any substantial technical difficulties, meaning the film came in on time. Due to the limited time, Justin Timberlake was only on set for one day, where they shot all of his scenes in the sniper tower, the drug deal scene, and most critically, the music video. The last scene is the one that Kelly viewed as the heart and soul of the whole film. Despite this, there were several relatively slapdash elements of the production. They only had a few hours in the location, so the dancers were forced to practice in a similar location, while the rest of the crew shot Timberlake's other scenes. When it came time to actually film, Kelly felt that the shirt that Justin was wearing was just too plain, a solid white t-shirt, so they asked if they had anything else to decorate it with. As they had recently been filming some stunts, they had a lot of fake blood, which Kelly sprayed on in a slapdash fashion. While some have commented it looks like Frank, or possibly an angel's wings, this is purely a coincidence, as it was a random blotch, although it would certainly be viewed as a Rorschach test. Another notable feature of the scene was the fact they did not have the rights for the song. All these things I've done by the Killers. The plan was to shoot the scene, then show it to the band, hoping and praying they would agree to the use of the music. Like many things in Southland Tales, it did miraculously work, and they were given rights to the track. Filming was finished in late September 2005, and then it came down to Kelly to edit the picture, as well as the visual effects team. He sent a very rough cut of the film to the Cannes Film Festival, with little hope it would be accepted. To his delight and trepidation, they were happy with it, and wanted to submit it for the Palme d'Or, the equivalent to Best Picture. He was then forced to abandon the editing and get whatever visual effects done that he could in the limited time. The Cannes cut is my preferred version of the film, as it includes the most character motivation, some additional comic moments, and is slightly restructured from the theatrical release. While Kelly has talked extensively about the unfinished visual effects in this version, it's almost unnoticeable. The differences between the two versions will be discussed in detail later. Unfortunately, when the film was shown at Cannes, it received an overly negative reaction, including boos. Its length, complexity, and absurdity were all criticized, as well as relegating the first 3 parts of the film to a graphic novel, leaving out many important details. Kelly called it a very painful experience on a lot of levels. It was scary. We thought maybe the movie wouldn't survive it, and we'd have to cut in like an hour out of it, or something crazy. But in the end, the movie was better off because of it. There was over a year between its first showing at Cannes and its official theatrical release, which involved cutting about 20 minutes of the film, hundreds of VFX shots, re-recording Timberlake's narration, and creating a new opening, to help explain some of the details from the graphic novels. Speaking of those, Part 3, Mysterious Ways. The film was released in November of 2007. The first bit of media in the franchise released in May of 2006, with issue 1 of the graphic novel. The second in September, and the third in January. Even if the aim was to get it into people's hands, there was a huge delay between the release of the comics and the actual film, meaning even if someone was an avid fan, they likely would have forgotten the details by the eventual release. The comics are largely a prequel story that starts immediately after Boxer Santaros goes through the rift, whereas the film starts 1 week later. There are however elements of integral, especially in the third part, which features some scenes exactly how they're depicted in the film. The comics are very strange in terms of content, extras, art style, and ideas. The first begins with Boxer waking up in the desert, just after going through the time rift. He has amnesia, and almost dies due to the heat. He's saved by Fortuno, who is a relatively minor character in the film, but plays a big part in the graphic novel. It goes into the backstory of a number of characters. Fortuna, for example, is first spotted gambling on a boat with Roland Tabernacle, although his part doesn't come in until the next issue. Turns out he's a bad gambler and is $100,000 in debt to some Vegas bookies. The neo-Marxists manipulate him towards the border crossing, which has changed in the world of the Southland tales. The border between states is more like the one between countries, with heavily armed guards willing to shoot rather than ask questions. Krista now is then introduced, portrayed by Sarah Michelle Gellar in the film. Here her more manipulative nature is at the forefront, as she conspires with Fortuna to get Boxer to sign a contract, offering them both $100,000. It's also revealed a contract that she had with a strip club, where she would recite poetry instead of getting naked. This shows her business prowess, as she manipulates almost all of the men around her, which is quite different to her apparently dumb behavior in the film. It's also revealed that the screenplay, The Power, which is a major feature of both the comics and the film, was not written by Boxer, and is written by Krista completely. The comic then shows unedited pages from the screenplay with no illustrations or anything, just plain text, which is a unique decision. The film within a film is prophetic, with characters from real life transposed into it, some with the exact same names. The only real difference is in the screenplay the main focus is on a newborn, a baby who hasn't had a bowel movement, and his farts cause earthquakes. In the film, Ronald takes on this role, with his journey through the time rift being his rebirth. The first issue ends with vague warnings about a roller coaster, which Boxer then hops on immediately. While riding it, he doses with liquid karma, which he's been addicted to the whole time. When he does this, he travels through time and sees a Native American chief on the prairie from a century before. They wave at each other. What relevance does this have to, well, anything? It's impossible to say. There might be some comparisons between what America was doing in the Middle East during the War on Terror and their treatment of Native Americans, but it's a bit of a stretch. After the end of the story, there's some miscellaneous cast photos, phrases, and merchandise tangent to the franchise. There's also some behind-the-scenes shots of making the film and advertisements for the future books. Part 2 takes place parallel to Part 1, following Roland Tabernacle as he travels with the neo-Marxists. At the same time, Boxer and Krista visit some locations from the screenplay, and there's a bit more explanation of what liquid karma is. It turns out the military was experimenting on their own soldiers with a drug, as it gives limited telepathy, as well as enhanced focus. Unfortunately, there were side effects like time travel, so it's still a work in progress. According to an unreliable narrator, this time bleed is something people can naturally do, and that's what the Native American chief is about. This still doesn't make any sense, but it's half an explanation. There's then an extended dream sequence, which might be related to Dungeons & Dragons. Boxer's running around in a maze made of sand, which I guess is the Middle East. He finds a dead monkey, flies buzzing around, which represents the American soldiers, and then a giant snake tries to come and kill him, which is oil, or the military-industrial complex, or maybe domestic terrorism. Moving past the metaphor, the snake could represent liquid karma, the character Serpentine, or the apocalypse in general. It could also be temptation in a biblical sense, or even drug abuse, with the poison in its fangs and falling into a coma. The metaphors are clear as mud. He runs away, hops through a giant hand, and finds Roland. Also, throughout this video, I've tried to make them consistent, but Roland and Ronald's names are going to be mixed up, because they're intentionally confusing, so I apologize anytime the names are swapped. Boxer and Ronald have the same dream, and after they wake up, he goes to the executives of Trier, who are responsible for liquid karma, and they have a meeting about it. This goes into the backstory of Trier, how they started making Zeppelins and moved into energy, and we also learn more about the backstory of Krista's screenplay. It turns out she was on a flight from Texas to California and passed too close to the time rift. Everyone else was knocked unconscious, but she gained psychic powers and possibly saw a version of herself riding a 7-headed dragon, but that's in the screenplay, so it might be a metaphor. The little person who works at Trier then dosed her with mushrooms and read her the Book of Revelations, and the screenplay was the results of that. Little people are a recurring motif in the film, and I've not found a single reason why. There is then more of the screenplay, including color illustrations of the many tattoos the Boxer will get, which is a bit of a no-no in the filmmaking world. It also depicts Serpentine as a sorceress, because many of the characters are associated with Dungeons & Dragons classes. This may or may not be important. In the screenplay, a snake eats a farting apocalypse baby, and the baby explodes the snake from the inside, and everyone cheers. The characters in the real world then follow the screenplay, going to a barn in the middle of nowhere, where Boxer gets tattooed with images from every major religion. At the same time, Ronald and Zora go to a rave nearby, and everyone forms a giant image of Boxer's face. Part 3 follows yet another set of characters, this time Boxer's wife, the daughter of a US senator. It then shows events just prior to Boxer being kidnapped, with a scavenger hunt for balls. Most of the humor is the level of a cringy 14-year-old. There are more fantasy references calling the body a paladin, and Simon Theory is called the Dungeon Master. It then cuts to more of the screenplay, featuring Krista on the flight that gave her powers, with references to the Book of Revelations and maybe Donnie Darko, as a plane engine mysteriously disappears. There's a bunch more backstory talking about US Ident, the plans for the fake shootings, and Krista's plans, but it's all in the film. What is not, however, is the backstory for pilot Abilene, him being a film star, then drafted, and how he became friends with Roland due to their love of all the books that Richard Kelly likes. The boys trade a block of opium to Simon Theory for the chance to be in the liquid karma experiment and thus get out of Iraq. Before they go under, however, we learn the actual backstory of the things, which is crucial. It turns out it's not about the currents of the ocean, but a trench filled with a different kind of oil. The serpent trench that is coiled around Earth, kind of like the world serpent. But we'll get back to that later. The point is, the super energy is not actually renewable, but a well to be tapped that will one day run out. The entire basis of their company is a lie, and one the government bought up. Next we see the friendly fire incident in the film that did the killers all these things I've done. The last few events in the comic are them cutting off Bing's finger, revealing why he wears a bandage in the film, and a few characters talking about the end of the world. Overall, the comics are a bad read by themselves, oftentimes confusing and contradictory with the film, and they also feature important information that feels tertiary, and the inclusion of pages and pages of screenplay just throws any sense of flow completely to a halt. But all of that is just backstory to the film itself. Part 4. Basket Case. As there are two versions of Southland Tales, we have to choose one to follow. In this case, I'll be using the Khan's Cut as the backbone of the story, as it expands on character motivations a tad bit more, and in general is a more complete film. It begins on July 4, 2005 in Abilene, Texas. It follows a young kid as he records his family's barbecue. It's a fun little sequence showing the brighter side of American patriotism. It acts as a sort of, what are we fighting for? Then, boom, mushroom cloud. A nuke hits, and while it's not shown, everyone on the tape is certainly dead. In the universe of Southland Tales, someone, although it's never stated exactly who, dropped 2 nuclear weapons on Abilene and El Paso. We now have a briefed version to the theatrical cut, where the exact history of World War III is explained in a doomsday scenario interface, sponsored by Panasonic, Bud Light, and Hustler. Also on screen are the subtitles of the 3 prequel graphic novels for some reason. This is not featured in the Khan's Cut at all, which jumps right into the film proper. It was an attempt to alleviate confusion, and featured a number of different panels from the prequel graphic novel. While it does clarify a few things, the information is presented so quickly to a first-time viewer it's overwhelming, especially the brief scene depicting the friendly fire sequence with pilot Abilene. While the rest of the opening is narration, for that brief time it stops, leaving the audience baffled. What the opening does, however, is show how America has gone to war with Iraq, Iran, Syria, North Korea, and Afghanistan. While it's not clear what their allies are doing, it is clear that the efforts are not going well, as the draft has been reinstated and America is running out of oil. It also goes into American politics somewhat, mirroring the effect that the war on terror had on Congress, with a big boost for Republicans before a greater pushback. In this case, the pushback is the neo-Marxists, a political terrorist group aiming to destroy capitalism and dethrone God. It then shows more images from the comic, depicting Boxer's journey into the desert, and Fortuna rescuing him. That catches everything up to the present day. The Khan's Cut still has narration over the opening, but it's over footage of Venice Beach, including a tank driving down the sand, the Hustler logo emblazoned boldly on its side. The product placement in Southland Tales is both excessive and laughable. The idea the military would need a porn magazine to sponsor them fits right in with the over-the-top America depicted in the film, and numerous other sci-fi satires. The same can be said for Bud Light, which even the protagonist of the in-universe screenplay, The Power, is said to be drinking 3 or 4 different times. Next we're introduced to Trier, and the concept of their wireless energy via liquid karma. There's a very strange interview with the leadership team, including the wizard, Baron von Westhaven, who is arguably the antagonist of the film. He's manipulating both sides, providing funding to the neo-Marxists and the presidential campaign, although his ultimate goal appears to be chaos. While it's not clear in the film, a phrase that will become a recurring theme, his plan seems to be to fund both organizations so they ultimately have a huge conflict, destroying the foundations of America. He, along with his team, will fly along on the Mega Zeppelin, lording over the destroyed landscape. To indicate what kind of man the Baron is, they show a business meeting with a Japanese company. In the contract, he is forced to relinquish 1 finger for the license to fluid karma, but they exploit a loophole, and Serpentine, the Baron's mistress and possibly wife, cuts off his hand. With all that backstory done, the film cuts to the main meat, beginning with Pilate, played by Justin Timberlake, reading from the Book of Revelations. While scripture may not seem like it's critical information, a large part of the film is inspired by it, in the later works of Philip K. Dick. Of course, Pilate doesn't interact with the main characters, not directly, and is instead sitting up on his watchtower, watching. Kelly wanted to demonstrate the changed nature of America, in that instead of the guns being pointed out, they're pointed in, towards its civilians. We then see Boxer with his face hidden pick up a glowing orb. These are the receivers for Fluid Karma, basically a Wi-Fi router, although it's never stated in the film. It then cross-dissolves to the title, Temptation Waits, based on the alt-rock song by Garbage. Boxer is then shown in his full rocky glory, with a number of religious tattoos inscribed on his back. He is bouncing his fingers up and down, a tick that was not in the original script, but when Johnson came on set he started doing it, and Kelly liked it so much it became a repeated motif. The film Kiss Me Deadly is playing on the TV in the apartment he's staying in, which is revealed to be Krista Nowes, who is played by Sarah Michelle Gellar. The screenplay, The Power, is then introduced, although the narration describes how they had written together, which the prequel comic contradicts. While Boxer helped edit it, Krista created it originally in a drug-induced haze. It's not clear that Pilot's narration is unreliable either, as he seems to be describing events he couldn't possibly know about, but he does. We've then got a scene between Krista and apparently an adult film director, Cindy Pazinski, but really the head of the neo-Marxists, played by Nora Dunn, best known for her 5-year stint on SNL. They talk business, and Krista reveals she's hooking up with Boxer, who is married to the daughter of a Republican senator. There's a brief scene showing US IDENT, the surveillance wing of the US government, and their attempts to locate Boxer Santeros, as well as some details about his mysterious disappearance. Back to the neo-Marxists, where Cindy is spying on the house Boxer is staying in, mentioning that Fortuno is a drug dealer and a pimp. We then cut to yet more characters, with Zora buying guns out of an ice cream truck. She's played by Sherry O'Terry, another SNL vet, and the dealer is Christopher Lambert. There is some genuinely funny dialogue here, and Zora's outfit is profoundly 2000s. The dialogue also references The Big Lebowski, one of the primary inspirations for the original draft, and something that's DNA still runs through the entire film. Zora tries to pay for her blanks with a personal check, the same as the dude pays $69, an ever so frequent number in Southland tales, cents for groceries with a post-dated check at the start of that film. After that, we return to Boxer's house and see some of Krista's talk show, where she discusses a variety of very serious topics, including teen horniness, which, as the song says, the most important part of their conversation, aside from emphasizing the porn background for Krista, is a scroll across the bottom of the screen commenting on current events, mentioning Bush, Cheney, and Clinton by name. While it's a minor element of the scene, it helps set the exact timeline of the film, which was unclear in the Khan's cut. Krista then goes on a rant about how repressed America is sexually, a point that is still relevant. She claims that it's a bisexual nation living in denial. While this isn't expanded on particularly in the film, it's an interesting point, and one different direction that it could have taken. The film is absolutely stuffed with these interesting ideas that rest in the background, inviting commentary and criticism while offering nothing of substance. More neo-Marxists are then introduced because the cast of characters wasn't quite large enough yet. Amy Poehler and Wood Harris, not Woody, play Dream and Dion respectively. They have successful careers as pop artists, but their current task is to set up a fake shooting by a racist cop, caught on camera by Boxer Santeros. There's also the introduction of Roland and Ronald. There is a fun element here where Ronald's reflection in the mirror is slightly delayed, a result of him traveling through time, although this is unfortunately the only time this comes up. Ronald has amnesia as a result of the rift, so is understandably a little frazzled. At one point he points his gun to the side of his head, foreshadowing the end of the film, as well as the near-constant references to suicide. In the end he fires, but just to the ground, something which Dream seems particularly excited about. Zelda's dialogue here is that of a kindergarten teacher encouraging an anxious student, including,
"Come on, honey, let's dry our tears and face our fears."
Her character is very much a chameleon, shifting personality completely when dealing with different people. She also provides the necessary exposition to get the scene moving on. Next, we finally bring a few of the disparate elements together, as Ronald heads to the now residence and gets introduced to the screenplay. There's some ridiculous moments here, as well as the introduction of the meta elements, where the in-universe screenplay foretells events in the real world. The Rock is to show off his acting talents, which are surprisingly existent, while portraying what is effectively a Flanderized version of himself. Him and Ronald ride along in a cop car, describing how the police do their job, what they focus on. This includes Ronald dropping the N-bomb, proving himself to be a racist cop he is supposed to be portraying. Of course, there is another very important piece of information dropped here, as we learn that
nobody, and I mean nobody, rocks a cock like Krista now.
Before that, however, there is a line cut from the theatrical release.
Right before I come, I puke all over her tits.
It happens.
This is genuinely the funniest exchange in the film, and it's a huge shame that it was cut. There's some confusion about the amnesia, as Boxer doesn't recall having a wife, and he then reveals the most important part of the screenplay.
The prophecy of Jericho Kane says that there will be one final thermonuclear baby fart, which will then trigger the apocalypse.
I haven't had a bowel movement in 6 days.
We then get another peek at US ident and Starla, who will soon become a crucial character. She's shown eating Cheetos out of a bag plastered with yellow smiley faces, which is the symbol of her pilot's drug business. Interestingly, when Nana Frost, one of the antagonists for the film, similarly eats Cheetos while she works. Mirroring is a common theme throughout Southland tales, characters doing the same actions or using the same verbiage, while otherwise having no interactions. This is excluding the characters who are literally clones of one another. The blackmail plot then goes into full swing, with Cindy calling into the Senator as Deep Throat 2, demanding
$1 million!
And a yes vote on Proposition 69. Unfortunately, her ploy doesn't work, as of course the US government
Don't negotiate with terrorists.
The Senator even offers a W laugh after he ends the call. While this was the official party line, and furthered the patriotic fever that swept the country post 9/11, it was far from the actual policy. The US government and individual organizations frequently negotiated with terrorists, sometimes were even friends with them, but enough propaganda and all of that was pushed to the sidelines. Now, over half an hour into the film, we get the introduction of US ident, its goals, and how the Republican Party organize it to dominate the war in cyberspace. Given there have already been multiple scenes there, and their purposes shape the neo-Marxist goals, this is another time when the theatrical cut is advantaged, having this scene much earlier. It also gets rid of the awkwardness of the Senator marching happily into the building, just after he is having a conference in one of the rooms. The neo-Marxists prepare for their upcoming plan, involving Dream and Dion getting shot. Just like everyone in the film, they believe they are of greater importance than they are, and have to put on disguises so they don't get recognized by the camera. The one doing makeup is Bing, who has a huge bandage on his hand because his finger was cut off. This is never mentioned in the film, only the prequel comic. This is followed by another scene in the cafe, which becomes a recurring location where revelations happen. Here Ronald discusses a recurring dream that he has involving sand walls, which was shown in the prequel comic. Boxer then asks whether he feels like 1,000 people in one, and that it's his memories holding them together. Now this line contributes to the themes, as Ronald is 2 people in one, and the different memories between him and his clone are a big part of the apocalypse at the end. He's then beckoned by a couple of punks who are neo-Marxists. They say some words to him, although we never hear them. Boxer is then enticed by Serpentine. The walls that she stands in front of have many posters of Boxer from his time preparing to be the Messiah, although he doesn't seem to realize it. He's led into the Small World books and the Mystery Annex. This might be a reference to the Disney World ride, or something much more obscure. All the patrons seem to be alt, and the Marxist saying "Dethrone God" is plastered on the walls. Here we discover several members of Trier, and after introductions we get one of the funniest sequences out of context, as Katerina declares,
"We have read your screenplay."
And then they have a brief tugging match over it. The apocalypse is then mentioned, as well as "This is the way the world ends, not with a whimper, but with a bang," which is drawn from T.S. Eliot's poem The Hollow Men, albeit with whimper and bang swapped, as the fear of complete annihilation was much greater than subtle degradation. And that is the end of the first act, and the title card 5, Memory Gospel, is shown. So far many characters have been introduced, although not half of the final cast. A number of different storylines have been set up, albeit without actual hints of what they're going to go. Themes are certainly running rampant, but without any direction, and even a true protagonist has yet to be established. In short, it's a busy, confusing, complex mess, and it's only just begun. We come back with the sign of an American flag being waved in protest, then go back to inside of US ident. We see just how deep the rabbit hole goes, as Starla is watching a monitor with overhead video of all the stalls at LAX. We're then introduced to her obsession with Boxer, which will become extremely plot relevant soon. She believes herself to be a character in his screenplay, and given the prophetic nature of the text, she kind of is. We then cut to Krista's TV show, discussing how the Supreme Court is a bunch of
supreme shitheads, right? Oh, don't tell me what to do with my body, you fuckstick!
Stunningly accurate, even today. Further, they're discussing abortion rights, and while Roe v. Wade was allegedly safe at the time Southland Tales was released, today we know just how precarious that position was. Next is one of the few action set pieces in the film, as a group of SWAT officers storm the headquarters of the neo-Marxists. They do this relatively efficiently, albeit murdering a bunch of unarmed people, but that's standard procedure for the police. This also includes the cameo of the Bear Jew, aka Eli Roth. I guess with all the other famous actors and entertainment people involved, he wanted to get shot on the toilet, which may or may not be a reference to Pulp Fiction. Kenny is also killed and falls into the giant toilet from before, so it seems intentional. Roland then wakes up from his drug-induced coma and sets on his journey to find Ronald. The drugs cause a Donnie Darko-esque visual effect, with everything distorted like it's underwater. Similarly, when Roland falls into the dumpster, there is a poster of Frank the Rabbit on the wall. The police find a bag of frozen thumbs, and it's mentioned that it was their intent to use them for election fraud. This is expanded on a bit in the prequel comics, but ultimately is yet another storyline that never has any payoff. Next is the fake domestic dispute, which includes some utterly absurd arguing between Dream and Dion. This is definitely meant to be funny, and it certainly borders on it, but due to delivery and the way it's shot, it never quite reaches there. Unfortunately, their perfect plan is interrupted by a real cop, Bart Bookman, played by John Lovitz, shows up and insists on helping. The scene is built up in an effective way, with fog caused by the tidal generator, and the soundtrack gradually increasing with intensity until it becomes a dance beat. The music stops as they arrive on scene, and Dream drops some slam poetry. Bookman responds in an appropriate way by gunning her and Dion down. Due to the nature of their plan, after the shots were fired, squibs were supposed to explode. However, in one of the genuinely funniest moments in the film, there's a significant delay, and they burst a few seconds after the shots. This would have been ridiculous with the original plan, with blanks, but combined with the actual violence, it's simply hilarious. After Boxer's camera is turned on, his tough guy persona dissipates immediately, and he begins to bounce his fingers against one another before running away. Ronald follows him soon after, then the narration says that no one could have anticipated this outcome, which is a lie. The problem is Pilot shouldn't have had any knowledge of this event or its outcome, but he does. Due to this, it seems like he's an omniscient narrator and not an actual character in the film. However, it's soon revealed that Zora was getting revenge on her neo-Marxist comrades, as well as working towards her own goals, and had arranged for Bookman to meet them there. So Pilot knows things he can't know, but not things that are still surprises for the audience, which just doesn't work, and renders the whole narration suspect. Wave of Mutilation is then played over the various characters going on their journeys. All of the act titles are from alt-rock songs, and so their use in the soundtrack is at least somewhat relevant. Once the fake crime scene has been set up, Boxer's next goal is established as we cut to a car commercial, one that Elon Musk wishes he could make. In it, to put it politely, two cars fuck. Someone spent many hours making this as realistic as possible. Likely tens of thousands of dollars of the budget went towards this, and frankly, not a dollar was wasted. It's meant to show the excesses of the Trier company, and furthers an earlier theme that Krista talked about, of America being a sexually repressed nation. It also reinforces the importance of the tidal generator, as it powers not only the military, but the average person's vehicles. Pilot then describes how the death of Dreen and Dion had a huge impact and set up for the revolution. We're told this, but never shown it. It also doesn't make sense how word got around so fast, as it's still the same day of the murders. The recording equipment even gave the time as 7:30 p.m., and it looks close to sunset, so less than 2 hours could have passed. It's possible time works differently, or the sun sets later in this world, but either way, things don't quite add up. We're back with some of the surviving neo-Marxists, including a statue that looks an awful lot like Frank's mask, although it appears to be an upside-down, chubby woman. Then we have a crucial scene exploring the motivations of some of the characters from Trier, including Serpentine and the Good Doctor. The Baron is established as an anarchist who wants to destroy the world while he flies above it in a mega zeppelin. There's also the idea that the reason that people are acting strangely is because their minds are literally being altered by the tidal generator. But that might be a metaphor. Ronald then confronts Zora in the police car when she insists that everything went according to plan, the first sign that she was in on it. Blank pieces out on his rollerblades, understandably, but Zora then runs him over. Twice to be sure. Roland then wakes up from his brief nap in the dumpster, wanders to the nearest ice cream truck and asks for a cell phone. It turns out this is the same weapons dealer Zora dealt with earlier, and he kidnaps Roland, believing him to be Ronald, for reasons that never quite take shape. Now we're introduced to yet another character, General MacArthur. She is high up in the military institution, but ultimately has little role to play in the film. She introduces Simon, played by Kevin Smith in heavy makeup. He's a wheelchair-bound intelligence operative who has a major role at the end of the film. He was in charge of the time rift and sending Boxer through it, although his motivations are never explored. He's referred to as the Dungeon Master, so it would be assumed he's in charge of something or orchestrating events. But aside from offering an exposition dump later, he doesn't seem to have any real power. If his role fit that name, he would theoretically be pulling the strings, orchestrating for all the moving parts to come together, but the film is simply not organized that way. There is no higher power or greater plan, just a bunch of lunatics running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Pilot's narration quotes Revelations, which features a pregnant woman, a dragon, and two beasts. Out of context Bible quotes are common all throughout Southland tales, but let's take a moment to examine this one. In Revelations 12, a woman gives birth to a son, who is then taken up to God. At the same time, a dragon with 7 heads and crowns chases after the boy, but is cast out by angels. The dragon then pursues the woman, unleashing a torrent of water after her, but the earth swallows it whole. In Revelation 13, the dragon gives its authority to a beast that rises out of the ocean, and the beast rules humanity for years. There is also a second beast that encourages worship of the first, and spreads his message with the number of the beast, 666. Pilate calls them the puppets of the Antichrist. Roland and Boxer are both newborns, and that they went through the time rift and their bodies are new. Roland has not had a bowel movement, just like the baby in the prophetic script. One could argue they were born from Mother Earth, as the time rift is caused by Utopia 3, the source of liquid karma. The dragon descending into the earth is similar to the serpent described in the comic, but stepping back a layer, it's also oil, the fruit of the earth. The dragons and the beasts are much less clear. The Baron aims to rule over Earth, so it could be seen as the first beast, but the dragon, or the devil, gives that authority, and here no one is given the Baron power. There is no caller for him, no second beast to prop up his power. It's possible that the beasts are what happens after, in a theoretical sequel, as the Mega Zeppelin being destroyed at the end of Southland Tales could correspond to the dragon and his angels being defeated in heaven. That's all in the future, however, as Boxer is finally discovered and brought before his wife, daughter to the senator. Their introductions, then Krista is brought to the mansion for a confrontation. Simon refers to her as a succubus, although it's clear that she's more of a pawn in a larger game than someone taking charge. While Madeline is understandably upset at Krista, Boxer defends her, offering that she's not just a porn star, but a multimedia icon, with lines including an energy drink that tastes
Really, really good.
He's then asked,
Can I see the cock chuggers?
No!
part of the larger issue is that both the women look similar, blonde, long hair, about the same age. Madeline also reveals that she is pregnant with Boxer's child, and while this could be relevant to the Book of Revelation's baby, it's not. First, because the timing doesn't match up, and second, because it's not actually Boxer's, but Brad's, her assistant. We then get first hints of the actual plot, as Krista reveals that the Baron had her go in the desert and retrieve Boxer. This comes out of nowhere without foreknowledge of the prequel comic, and even then the Baron's goals are still unclear. Due to the dark and stormy night, it's awash with revelations, as Madeline reveals the Baron has been funding the neo-Marxists as well.
Playing both sides so that I always come out on top.
Of course, he denies both allegations, despite them being true. This is the point of the film where Boxer ceases to be himself, and becomes the character from his screenplay, Jericho Kane. Multiple characters refer to him as such, and his role in the film is now uncovering a mystery that doesn't quite exist. Zelda then offers some cryptic comments, including allusions to Bible verses without any actual meaning, and then runs off into the darkness. There's a nice musical montage depicting some of the characters. We do get the information that the Baron is working with the military, and discussions of a body that will eventually be revealed to be Boxer's, although for now it's simply more questions. Now Pilot becomes an actual character, as well as the introduction of Keith, who will become crucial in the finale of the film. They organize a drug deal, trading weed for fluid karma. This is a bigger deal in the comics, directly causing Pilot's injury, and Roland to leave the military, but here it's mostly just world building. Then we come to, according to Kelly, the heart and soul of the film, a full-on musical number of the Killer's All These Things I've Done. Pilot wanders around the arcade in a delusional state drinking beers. He wears a plain white t-shirt with a huge blood splash. In the background, nurses with white hair and latex dance. The song was originally about Matt Pinfield, vice president of A&R at Columbia Records. He had been a mentor to soldiers suffering from PTSD in Iraq, and Brandon Flowers wrote the song after hearing his stories. The key line was, "I've got soul, but I'm not a soldier." In the context of the film, it's similar to its original intent, about the soldiers being injured and dying overseas, and how they were neglected when returning home. Just like many of the characters in the film, they were simply playing pieces in a much larger game that they would never truly be able to see. This is followed by the final act break of the film, entitled Wave of Mutilation. The remainder of the film takes place on a single day, in the conflux of all the assorted ideas. It begins with group yoga at US Ident. Yoga is thousands of years old, but only really began wide-scale practice in the United States in the 1960s and 70s, although even then it was still seen as a New Age trend. This sort of forced exercise would begin to occur in the corporate world in the early 2000s, with tech companies that viewed themselves as progressive and forward-thinking. Celebrities began to preach its benefits, and so it very much fits in the world of Southland Tales. Krista heads to Zora for some drugs, but finds the highly incriminating tape that depicts the shooting of Dream and Dion. It's sitting in a chair, out in the open, and merely labeled Boxer. Krista understandably believes this is the footage of her and Boxer, which was used as blackmail, and steals it. This is another scene with the Bunny Frank poster in the background. Krista then decides to show the tape to everyone in an attempt to influence the election. While she does this, she passes by both Martin in his car and the cafe where the actual blackmail drop-off is happening. Martin has been served a draft notice and is considering doing away with himself. Luckily, Roland arrives to save him and then demands his help. Cindy meets up with a member of the senator's team and gives him a copy of the tape, as well as a taser to the balls. And she's not the only one who gets in on the action, as Terry gets her own electrifying finish. Boxer, or rather Jericho, has decided that nothing matters and he's gone full Tom Hardy, wandering down the beach, downing a six-pack while spilling it all over his hoodie. Starla has fully embraced her role in the screenplay, imparting critical information to him. However, she can't hold back her own desires as she screams,
I want to suck your dick.
Then commits sexual assault, threatening both herself and Boxer. Weirdly enough, the one to save Boxer is Pilot, our fair narrator. While he previously had a scene interacting with Martin that was relatively minor, now he's interfered directly, in conflict to his seeming role in the story, that of an omniscient observer. Maybe this is meant to imply that there can be no observers in modern-day society, that even those who try to stay out of it are forced to pick a side, and not doing so is equivalent to murder? There's another musical interlude, as characters race across the city. Krista to drop off the tape, Zora to stop her, a US agent to kill them both. In the promenade there is another sniper, again emphasizing how different society has become, and how heavily militarized. The copious amounts of American flags help this as well. Once they get inside the bar with the neo-Marxist drop-off, there is more product placement for Bud Light, which is certainly more comical than it is annoying. Krista puts the tape in a hole in Karl Marx's mouth, and there's a certain amount of irony to a porn star using a glory hole in order to facilitate election fraud, but not in the expected way. Further, she believes the tape she is sending is a sex tape, but it's in fact evidence of a murder adds an additional layer to this. Zora finds Krista and her porn star girlfriends, and in the ensuing chase a few people are killed, but mostly Zora and her cop friend Bookman. Boxer is then kidnapped by Fortunio and some neo-Marxists, although not before dousing himself with more beer. It's now revealed they were working for the Baron all along. This positions the Baron as someone who is in control of everything, but it's later revealed he was missing critical bits of information, and was betrayed by those closest to him. The kidnapping is very strange, however, as they simply drop him off on the Mega Zeppelin, where he was going anyway. All the characters prepare for the final confrontation, and it's noted that the ice cream truck is protected by a powerful enchantment by Simon. Given what happens at the end, this may not be a metaphor and is something to remember. There's yet another musical montage, although this one is quite high quality. The song is Howl by Black Motorcycle Club, and it's over a tour of the Mega Zeppelin, with most of the characters we've met throughout the film. It feels like a real place, with a nice flow, and there are a huge amount of extras. This is definitely the biggest scene of the film, and it actually works in its entirety. It's notable that on the inside of the Mega Zeppelin are a number of pictures depicting nuclear detonations, implying the apocalypse is happening soon. Similarly, Boxer says that their 3 days are up, and the world is going to end. He advises his wife to accept it, and says it's the only way to end all this suffering. One good musical moment begets another, and so Rebecca Del Rio performs a cover of the Star-Spangled Banner. This was a reference to one of the final scenes in Mulholland Drive, when the protagonist attends a theater where Rio sings the Spanish version of Crying. The Star-Spangled Banner was written during the War of 1812, when the British fought the United States, again. There was a very real fear that it might have been the end of the country if the war was lost, but the anthem was one of hope, of seeing the sunrise after the battle. This becomes ironic as in Southland Tales, there is no tomorrow, and the world is about to end. Cindy and Smallhouse meet again on this Mega Zeppelin, in a conversation that seems like it's going to be very important. They trade jabs, and Cindy says,
Ooh, stop. You're getting me hot.
This is dripping with sarcasm, but the pair will later kiss, at least in this universe. Cindy also says the Queen has become a dragon and will be vanquished by a sword. In a reasonable film, this would be a continuation of the Book of Revelation comments from earlier, as the devil was personified as a dragon, and it would come to Boxer to slay them. Southland Tales is no ordinary film, however, as Nana May, referred to as a dragon, is slain by a no-name character with no plot relevance. Finally, Boxer, in the persona of Jericho Kane, heads up to get some answers. On the way, he picks up a pistol in a mysterious box with a glowing red orb above it. These orbs have been featured all throughout the film, and are receptors for liquid karma. The different colors are a reference to the Homeland Security Advisory System, which is used from September 2001 until 2009. Jericho steps in his elevator, rides it up, and then is immediately disarmed of the pistol he had just gotten. Finally, the plot of the film is revealed. It only took 2 hours. They describe how the tidal generator is slowing the acceleration of the planet and creating a time rift. To test the rift, they decide to send monkeys through it. Boxer then offers,
The soul of a monkey can't survive the dimensional threshold.
It's then revealed that Boxer is a duplicate, and the body has been mentioned previously as himself, but the version that didn't travel through time. Because the past Boxer is dead, it's assumed that he fought with his future self and thus committed suicide. But in the most iconic line, Boxer says,
I'm a pimp. And pimps don't commit suicide.
Believe it or not, that was one of the large thematic points that Kelly was trying to get across. He believed that America was a pimp nation, and its response to 9/11, including the invasion of Iraq, was a form of self-destruction. It was also a reference to veteran suicide rates, which are statistically incredibly high. The line is also repeated half a dozen times after this, and Ronald/Roland shooting themselves is a point of dramatic tension. In essence, this line could be considered the conflux of the film. After the scientists discuss the two identical souls can't coexist, it then cuts to Roland. While it's not quite stated yet, it's clear they both went through the rift, and the twin brothers are in fact the same person. On their journey to Mexico, him and Martin need cash, so hit an ATM. Due to the general chaos, the transaction doesn't go through, so Ronald decides that
We're going to take the ATM machine with us to Mexico.
their Fast and Furious plot works, and they drag the machine straight out of the wall. At the same time, the neo-Marxists have started riots all over the city, and chaos is taking over the streets. By some divine coincidence, the ATM smashes into the ice cream truck that Roland was in, and it flips in a pretty solid stunt. Roland then steps out of the car with an enormous revolver, shoots some random people, and is then shot in the eye, in another reference to Donnie Darko. The twins are then reunited in the back of the ice cream truck. Boxer gets some answers from Serpentine, then kisses her so hard she falls over. This information was already in the prequel comic, and could be assumed by everything already presented, but confirmation is important because of how confusing everything is. Boxer then realizes the end of the world is coming, referencing ocean tides and the Tower of Babel, but all of this, in its entirety, is a misdirection. Throughout the film, the Revelations and the Bible, the Christian versions of the apocalypse, are referenced a number of times, but Boxer is tattooed with dozens of different religious symbols. Any one of them could be the true end. In this case, the one that fits the best is Ragnarok and the world serpent. In Norse mythology, there are three common tales about Thor and Jogmundur. In the first, Thor is performing tasks for the giant king. One of these is a test of strength, as he is asked to lift a large cat, which is the world serpent in disguise. While he is unsuccessful, he still manages to raise one of its paws above the floor. It was said that if he had succeeded, it would have altered the boundaries of the universe. The second tale involves Thor going fishing with another giant. They go deep into the sea, further than any had ever gone before. Thor cuts the head off an axe and uses it as bait, and manages to snag Jormungandr. Thor pulls it into the air and the two face off, the great creature expelling Atter, poisonous fluids. Thor grabs his hammer to kill the great beast, but the giant cuts the line, and the serpent returns to the depths, circling the earth. The final story is the most relevant. It says that during Ragnarok, the end of days, the world serpent will release its tail from its mouth and unfurl, flooding the world and arriving on land. It, along with some other terrible beasts, will confront the gods, and eventually it will combat Thor. The serpent will be killed, but so too will Thor, who will walk 9 paces, then collapse from the venom. With all these stories, there are parallels in Southland tales, although it's certainly up for interpretation which fits into which archetype. Thor seems like he could be Boxer. He's the character with the most screen time, a developed backstory, and he's the one the most attention is devoted to by other characters. But in Southland tales, it's inherently counter to traditional storytelling, and so is in fact Ronald that is Thor. In Ronald's first scene, he almost comes into contact with his other half. If he did so, the world would have ended immediately, skipping the rest of the story. Once the two souls meet and shake hands, that is what begins the end. This is the altering of the universe in the first story. Roland is claimed to be his twin brother, but is in fact his past self, which fits the disguise element. The Giant King is the neo-Marxists as a whole, who want to disrupt the status quo, thus daring to bring the two characters close together, but not actually wanting to succeed. In the second story, the poisonous fluids of the world serpent potentially prevent its destruction. While Jogmundur foretells Armageddon, the parallels in the film may change. While in one case it is himself, two halves of the same whole, in others it represents fluid karma. This can be seen most clearly in the third issue of the prequel comic, where it's described as a deep trench wrapping itself around the core of Earth, like a snake guarding its egg. Thus the witch Serpentine and the Serpentine Trench. One of the byproducts of fluid karma is the processed form, which is a form of psychedelic drug. Its effects are described in the comic and shown through several musical interludes throughout the film. Given how strong the effects are, it could be considered a type of poison, or Atter, just like the myth. Ronald bleeds just before the final night's events, giving him a dulled sense of self. It's possible this is what led to him searching for his other self, unaware of the full implications. It's said the tidal generators are used to extract fluid karma, are altering Earth's rotation, and thus will cause the end of life, even without the time rift or anarchy. Although it's stated by Trier that the energy is limitless, it's not. They were taking a resource from the Earth, and while the trench may be very deep, they dug very greedily, and eventually it will run out. When enough is gone, the serpent will cease to be a complete hole, and will unfurl, releasing its mouth from its tail, and thus the end of days. In the story, the serpent confronts Thor and they kill each other. Roland and Ronald clasp hands, but the world doesn't end immediately, which could be seen as a parallel to the 9 paces that Thor took, although in this case it's vertical movement. Both Ronald and Roland took severe injuries in the battle with the police, again mirroring the war wounds of the story. In effect, the film is lying about the nature of the apocalypse, and all of the characters who believe it's one thing, or another, are incorrect. This fits with the farcical nature of it, in comments on the denigration of the US public and the government. Back to the film. As the ice cream trucks rise, there is yet another musical montage. Krista and her fellow dancers perform an elaborate routine with clear gas masks, another sign of an impending apocalypse. In the meantime, US identity is being destroyed by the neo-Marxists. This is done without much pomp or circumstance, although there were a few hints this was going to happen. Once the music is over, Jericho fires his pistol in the air and attempts to get an evacuation happening, but their Baron won't allow it. Of course, ultimately his protestations are pointless, and they reveal the plan is for Roland to dethrone God by kickstarting the apocalypse. It seems they were successful in this, as a light is expanding around the two men. Cindy and Smallhouse meet up again and embrace passionately as an ice cream truck floats in front of them, then fires a rocket that takes out the Mega Zeppelin and everyone inside it, killing about 90% of the cast. At the same time, a bloody image of Jesus appears on Jericho's back, implying that was the correct religion, but again, this is a misdirect. Roland and Ronald have a passionate discussion about the power of forgiveness and how pimps don't commit suicide. Then the world ends with a smile, and a nod to Dr. Strangelove. Part 5. Two Sides of the Same Coin. Richard Kelly initially sent a rough cut of Southland Tales to the Cannes Film Festival, expecting it not to be accepted. To his surprise it was, and the first showing was in May of 2006. There was met with a large amount of derision and scorn, although Kelly said that ultimately made the film better. That's certainly up to the viewer. The first and most obvious is the runtime. The Cannes cut was 2 hours and 38 minutes. The theatrical cut was 2 hours and 12 minutes, so about 15 minutes of cut footage. Some sources claim the Cannes cut was originally even longer, around 160 minutes, although the only available release is the Blu-ray version, which is 2 hours and 38. Both films begin with the home video footage of Abilene, Texas, moments before a nuke is set off. The Cannes version has about 1 extra minute of footage of the party, and the added time does make the eventual devastation more effective. Then the films veer fairly wildly, as the theatrical release has a new introduction meant to make the film less confusing, by throwing out a huge amount of backstory in a few minutes, including some panels from the prequel comics. There was even a whole timeline to try to place the film more in a specific time, but ultimately it serves to reduce the fairy tale feel of it. Southland Tales is an absurd film, and this felt like an attempt to appeal to a wider audience that it was never going to find success with. The Cannes cut starts with Hustler Tanks and Trier, as well as narration explaining Utopia 1 and Liquid Karma. The theatrical, on the other hand, has Pilot reading from the Bible and a news report about the prequel comics, but it doesn't set up Trier at all. It does, however, show the opening of US Ident and establish their purpose in the story, which the Cannes cut didn't do until 35 minutes. Also oddly, the scene with Pilot in the Bible is in both versions, but in the Cannes cut it's in a fairly light daytime scene, whereas in the theatrical release it's dark blue, maybe very early morning. The theatrical cut has its introduction to the Barry and his company at about 10 minutes, intercut with scenes of Krista and Boxer. The timing of these scenes has changed in the two versions, as in the Cannes cut it was their introduction, then Krista going off to Cindy, a few scenes of reactions to the blackmail, then Krista scene in the TV room. The theatrical cut instead has introduction, TV room, then Cindy. It works well enough in both versions, but overall the Cannes cut has a bit more flow to it. Interestingly, despite all the changes to both versions, the scene with Ronald in the bathroom and Roland tied to the chair occurred about the exact same point, 20 minutes in, only 20 seconds apart. The next scene plays out the same, although there is more dialogue in the Cannes cut. Aside from some of the previously adjusted scenes, much of the US Ident stuff is the same, although the order of scenes is changed once again, with the Cannes cut having Boxer and Ronald's discussion at the cafe, with additional dialogue, then the assault on the neo-Marxists, whereas the theatrical cut is reversed. Presumably this was to include an action scene for audience who would surely have gotten bored, and potentially left. The next scenes are the same, including the shooting, the cars, and the party, although the Cons cut features the critical scene outlining the motivation of Serpentine, the Baron, and Zelda, whereas the theatrical cut was not, adding much confusion. Similarly, General Tina MacArthur is completely cut out of the theatrical release, with no mention of her by other characters. Given her overall role in the story, this is the change that makes the most sense. She never makes any real decisions or has any impact on other characters, just adding a bit of backstory to Simon and the Baron. She does a little bit more in the prequel comics, but not enough to justify her screen time. In one of the oddest changes, after Boxer's confrontation at the mansion, Zelda shows up and offers cryptic hints. In the Cons version, the orb she is holding is yellow. In the theatrical version, it is blue. Going back to the idea of the terror threat level, this means that in the theatrical release, it was a less threatening time, even though nothing had changed. The theatrical cut also moves a scene that was in the first 10 minutes of the Cons cut to here, at almost 90 minutes, featuring the Baron screwing over the Japanese business partner, revealing how cruel he can be. Given the Baron is sort of the antagonist of the film, and it just had a scene showing his callousness, this is a strange choice. It should have been excluded entirely, as it has no bearing on the plot. The rest of the film is largely unchanged, aside from some VHX shots of the Zeppelin, a little bit more dialogue, and the cutscenes from the General. The Star-Spangled Banner song is moved, so as not to have two musical numbers in a row. There is one further orb that was changed in color from red to orange. That one is at the end of the film, when everything is just about to go down, and makes it seem like Kelly was undermining the idea for the orbs in the first place. Finally, Cindy and Smallhouse don't share a kiss just before they're exploded. Apparently test audiences didn't buy their romance. Ultimately, both versions are deeply flawed, but the Cons cut has some incredible lines that were cut from the theatrical release, and keeps in a few more important scenes which help flesh out the motivations of the characters, ultimately making it superior. It's up for debate which version is the director's cut, and whether edits were made out of attempting to make it more palatable, or to actually improve the film, but ultimately the film was a huge flop, opening to just 63 theaters and making less than $200,000 on a $17 million budget. But that wasn't quite the end. Part 6. Why Don't You Love Me? While the reaction to the Cons cut was negative, that doesn't cover the full extent of the vitriol. Roger Ebert called the worst film since The Brown Bunny, infamous for an unsimulated scene of oral sex. It was called the biggest, ugliest mess, and one of the worst films ever presented in the competition. Despite the volume of negative attention, there were a few critics who enjoyed it, with Jay Hoberman even comparing it to Mulholland Drive. The theatrical release was slightly better reviewed, ending up with a 41% positive on Rotten Tomatoes. Even among the positive reviews, there was certainly trepidation, calling it not entirely coherent and not easy to love. Much of the cast has commented on the film as being confusing and strange. Justin Timberlake said in a 2011 interview with W Magazine that he still doesn't know what the movie is about. Kelly maintains that it is the thing that he's most proud of and is generally misunderstood. His views on the film are interesting. He told actors at the time, "I know you might not understand what I'm trying to do, and you can't maybe put together the crazy big picture, because I'm still figuring it out." He was very focused on the film having a sense of dignity, which makes the overall comedic tone even stranger. It's certainly possible to create a musical sci-fi apocalyptic drama comedy with a sense of dignity, but it's not easy, and it certainly was not created here. Many of the themes and ideas that Kelly were reaching for had merit, and could even be considered noble. America was still in a patriotic fervor after 9/11, and the war in Iraq still had public support, but Kelly was expressing his anger and dissatisfaction with the government as a whole, and the individuals, in an artistic way. The film wants to examine patriotism as a concept and create a world where a revolution makes sense, something that would cause Americans to get off the couch and take action. The film was shot at a similar time to Hurricane Katrina, and while that didn't inform the script, it did help inform the filming, the emotions present in the scenes, and the final edit. The government's response was a turning point for some, as the Bush administration made a mess of the cleanup, and there are still issues to this day. Much of this comes through in the finished product, if slightly scattershot. Kelly also compared events of the film to the reactions to the Rodney King trial in the 90s, as that was the last time that he could remember that people got so upset. Kelly said it all came from a logical place. It was merely the ambition and density that got the best of him. This is actually one of the problems with the film, oddly enough. He has, or at least had, an explanation for every mystery in the film. Unfortunately, there are answers for all the eccentricities that define it, even things that have no influence, like how Lambier, the ice cream truck driver, was either Dream's father or ex-husband. The relationship is completely immaterial, but Kelly thought about it. They never even interact in the film. It's bizarre to have made that connection. Ultimately, Justin Timberlake is right. The film is pop art. Kelly believes that it is something more than it is, that the greater lore or mythology are important or even crucial for understanding, but that's a flawed premise. His prequel comics go into details about the foundations of the world, but ultimately having that knowledge doesn't improve the film. In all of my research, watching the film dozens of times, delving deep into the reasons behind its creation, it hasn't improved the actual quality of the product. Southland Tales can be funny. It can make interesting observations about society. It has some great musical montages. It has an interesting premise. It's also an absolute mess, with characters and design elements appearing and disappearing completely at random. Motivations come and go, and any sort of grand plan is wiped out by a final act that renders most of the film pointless. It is taking every single idea for a film and throwing them together, hoping the glue of extremely talented actors is enough to hold it together. The question I had at the beginning of this journey was whether the film was good or bad. And ultimately I think it's just not applicable. The film doesn't work on its own, but it does work as a piece of modern art. The messy visuals and incomprehensible story create an enigmatic mystery that is explained completely through expanded material. Kelly's genius is fully displayed here with all that implies. It is what it is, and for some people, a very small group, that's exactly what they want. So there we are. No real conclusions reached, and a mess of a video that took several years to make. If anyone has watched this entire thing, I applaud your dedication and thank you. And as always, be well.